We are live. Happy Friday, everyone. My name is Lucy Gray, and I'm one of the co-founders of a professional learning community called Actionable Innovations Global. And we're having a conference coming up called the GLOW Conference, which we'll talk about at some point today, I'm sure. But I'm really thrilled today to have you be part of our conversation with Dana Mortenson of World Savvy. If you don't know Dana, I'm going to bring up a slide here if I get coordinated. Anyway, here's what we do for Actionable Innovations Global. We are an inclusive professional learning community. We want to support and inspire educational leaders. We want to host conversations like this and connect people. And we also write about global educational innovations in Medium. So that's a little bit about us. If you knew the Global Education Conference Network, which I used to run with Steve Hargadon, this is the new version of that with new people, new management, and a new event called the GLOW Conference, Global Learning for an Open World, which will take place in November. And World Savvy is our premier partner. We're very excited to be working on this conference with you, with World Savvy, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in a little bit. If you want to follow us and get connected, you can find us on all different sorts of social media. Here's a QR code that will take you to our Linktree link. We have a Medium publication. We have an online community where you can network with others, and other channels where you can connect with global educators and innovators. So that's where you can find us. And I'll put that in the chat as well in a little bit. Today, I would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat wherever you are, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, on Hopin, or YouTube. The best place to kind of see the conversation is in Hopin. Things might be a little bit limited on the other platforms. We're still kind of experimenting with them. But please introduce yourself in those channels so that we know that you're here. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and maybe what your role is in your organization. If you want to tweet out anything about today's talk, you can use the GlobalEd22 hashtag. And you can also share your LinkedIn profile too if you want to connect with others and network. We want this to be a networking event. So that's just a little bit about your participation. We want you to be actively involved. So I'm really pleased to bring Dana onto the stage here. Dana is a longtime friend of the Global Education Conference and now the GLOW Conference. And she is the co-founder and CEO of World Savvy and also one of the funniest people I know. So if you ever have the chance to spend time with Dana, it's always a treat. World Savvy is a national educational nonprofit working to educate and engage youth as responsible global citizens. World Savvy supports change agents in K-12 education to create more inclusive, adaptive schools that ensure all young people can develop the skills and dispositions needed to thrive in a more diverse, interconnected world. World Savvy's programs provide support at 3 critical levels to deeply integrate global competence into teaching, learning, and culture, student engagement capacity, and school and district leadership support. Since 2002, she has led the organization through significant national expansion, reaching more than 800,000 students and nearly 7,000 teachers across 45 states and 32 countries, from offices based in Minneapolis, San Francisco, and New York. Dana is also an Ashoka Fellow and was named one of the New Leaders Council's 40 under 40 Progressive American Leaders and Women We Admire Top 50 Women Leaders of Minnesota for 2022. She was also the winner of the Tides Foundation Lehman Award for Excellence in Public Advocacy in 2014. She's a frequent speaker on global education, and their work has been featured on many channels such as PBS, the New York Times, and Edutopia. So without further ado, I just want to say hello, Dana, and thank you for coming.
Hi, Lucy. It is an absolute honor and a privilege. I'm so excited to be chatting with you and in this new amazing platform and community. As you know, I'm continue to be a big fan. So
yeah, I'm excited for this. And I'm going to turn this over for a second to my friend Don, who I'll bring on stage, who's going to ask you some of his famous or infamous questions from his adaptation of Vanity Fair's Proust questionnaire. And I've learned how to say Proust now officially. So take it away, Don.
Okay, thanks, Lucy, and welcome, Dana. Thanks for stopping by today.
absolutely.
It's an honor. So for those of you who've been on the show before, you know how we start the format, a form of just to get us all on the same place with the Proust questionnaire. For those of you that haven't, I'll give some quick background. So the Proust questionnaire, it's just a set of questions that was answered by the French writer Marcel Proust. And of course, sometimes it's used today by interviewers as well. So Proust answered these questions in the form of a confession book, which was a sort of a popular parlor game in Victorian times. And I've gone and taken these questions and adapted them slightly. And you know, you can use these in your class with students. It's a great way to get to know students as well. And you can adapt them. I put a link into the piece I wrote about this. And when I actually interviewed myself, which is, I always test stuff for myself. And there's a link to those if you want to see the full format questions. I'll just be asking about 4 today to Dana. So that's the background of it. So let's go straight to it, Dana. What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
I'm going to say punctuality. I was punctual today, but I think in general, I'll give that. It'll be my answer today.
That's awesome. Okay. Second question: what words or phrases do you most overuse?
Oh, this is sort of infamous within our team. Robust, rubric. I got a lot there. Those are 2 R ones, but I tend to get on sort of a trend where I overuse those in particular. So I'll use those 2 today: rubric and robust.
Okay. Yeah. Robust. Oh my God. That's. I'm trying to think. My favorite overused word today is seating chart.
Yeah.
And yesterday's most overused word was index card.
Yeah. I can see that. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, Dana, what talent would you most like to have?
Oh, that's easy for me. I have my superpower would absolutely be speaking every language and dialect that exists in the world. That would be the talent I'd want to have, and my superpower, my personal superpower.
Oh my God, that is brilliant. Why didn't I think of that one? That would be so great. I blandly put, I would like to predict the future.
Yeah, I mean that would be fun too. But sometimes I'm frightened by what I might do with that knowledge. So I don't know. I can't. I'm of 2 minds whether that would be a bad or a good thing. But yeah, and in my house, my kids know that it would also include being able to communicate with animals. That would extend beyond just the human linguistic realm.
Oh my God. No, that would be so awesome as well. Yeah. Because I do love dogs. And of course, I do a lot of talking to our dog, but
Yeah,
you know, you get
exactly.
them back and what have you.
We think they understand us, but I don't. Yeah, but I don't. I would love to be sure.
No, I would love to know what they're thinking. You know, I mean, it would be fascinating. Absolutely fascinating because, you know, people are more transparent like that, right? We know exactly sort of what they're up to, but
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So how about this last one, Dana? Who is your favorite hero of fiction?
Oh, hero of fiction. Oh my gosh. Hero of fiction.
If
Well,
anyone wants to answer this, throw your answer in the chat.
yeah, throw your answers in the chat. I read Pride and Prejudice every year, and I sort of you know, I want to say it doesn't feel like she's my favorite hero, but I really like Elizabeth. I don't know. It's just that might be I might want to refine that answer on another day, but that's just what popped in my head because right around this time of year, I always pull it out and read it.
Right. I usually my hero fiction fave is Batman.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which often then I get the following question: which, the old one or the new one?
Right. I bet.
You know, and that's because I grew up with it on TV in Ireland, and it was something that I would watch every week. The old Batman and Robin, and it was like just my favorite TV show as a kid.
Yeah,
and it's stuck way back in memory in my head.
I will say, John, that now having children of my own, the heroes of all sort of animated series they've done a little bit of a better job in sort of portraying strong young women. Like Moana is one of my kids' favorites. And that's like as a hero, and that it's kind of nice to see that transition happening.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Okay. Let's do one last one, Dana. And what occupation would you choose if you weren't in education?
Again, this is a joke in my house. I would literally find something that allowed me to be around dogs all the time. The older I get too, and the more curmudgeon I get, the more I enjoy the company of dogs. I would probably, I have a dream of sort of taking all the dogs that have been, given up for adoption, adopting them and living on a farm with them. So I would do something involving animals probably.
Wow. Well, I just had a friend in London who reinvented himself as a dog groomer, went to school for it. And
it might be, I don't know. It could be in my future, Don. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I blandly picked here. I'd be an architect because I'm obsessed with buildings and space.
My husband is an architect, and I will say it's one of the professions, I would not have known this, that you train for almost as long and as much as a doctor before you can actually render your own designs. So it's been something to watch him build that career. But yes, I am also fascinated with design and buildings, and I could see that being a really fulfilling career.
Yeah, and I'll close this up by telling you what I could have been. I started out as a pre-dent student.
Oh, really?
Yes. And so my path has changed so much of what I studied and what I ended up doing.
No kidding.
Yeah, but I'm glad I gave that up. But anyway,
yeah, I started in international affairs and thought I would be a diplomat or something. So yeah, the shift was shift for me too.
Okay, well that concludes it. So Dana, thank you for being open and answering Don Pruse's questions.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much.
Great. And Lucy, I'll bring. Do you want to come back in? Thanks.
Here I am, and goodbye, Don. Thank you for your contribution. So we're getting. I'm going to remove the slides so we can actually have a conversation. That's much better. But I know this is why we're friends, because I love Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice too, and I love dogs. Well, I didn't know I loved dogs as much until the pandemic hit and we got our pandemic puppy.
Oh, he is.
So, but like they're so good at comforting us. I didn't realize how powerful that connection was, and you will never not see me without a dog from now on for the rest of my life. I will always have a dog.
Yeah, I'll always have at least two. We have two now. I would have more, but I think there's like some statutes in citywide that you can't have more than 3 dogs, or you become.
My husband won't let me. That's our statute here. Anyway, I'm really excited to see people in the audience from Algeria, Argentina, Senegal, some friends that we know, like I don't know if you've met Pam Moran. She's in the audience. We have some really great people here today. So I hope they'll ask some fantastic questions in the chat as we go along. What I wanted to start out today was I really would love for you to tell us the story of World Savvy and how it came to be. I know that you have a partner and a co-founder in this, and a little bit about your mission for World Savvy. I would love to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So we actually turned 20 years old, if you can believe that. We see this year, it's sort of a mind-blowing milestone. But 22 years ago in New York City, I grew up in a family of educators. I had always been really, really interested in global issues, international affairs. It was at the dinner table. But it wasn't really in my K-12 experience. It was mainly my father and my parents who had a lot of rich conversations. I was about to say robust. So you really do like that word, Don. A lot of rich conversations about the world, even though I grew up in, a small town in New Jersey. When I got to grad school, I was going to Columbia, SIPA at Columbia, studying international affairs. And I met Madiha Murshid. So she is the co-founder of World Savvy. And at the time, she was, an undergrad major in economic development at Harvard. And I saw a great study partner in her. I was like, I need you for my stats class and for all the econ classes I had to take. And pretty much from the first week, we became just really great friends. And she sort of in a similar path, but in a very different context. She grew up in Bangladesh. She's from Bangladesh. And her mom founded the first school post-independence in Dhaka. And so in the 70s, so she grew up in a bassinet in the back of the classroom. And so in a similar way, we both sort of came together on this idea of like education is the bedrock and the foundation, and it's how you build your worldview. Only her experience, she went to United World College in Singapore. So by the time she graduated, right, her exposure to the world, and she had this sort of effortlessly global worldview, right? Cultures, history, politics, anything. She was just very at home in the world. And, by the time I had met her, the first year we became quite close. She went back to Bangladesh for the summer. I was working for the UN in the summer. And when we came back in the second year, just the second week of grad school, 9/11 happened. And so, as you know, I'm from New Jersey. I was working full-time at a law firm while I was in school full-time. And, for anyone who's in the presentation today that was, well, anywhere on 9/11, but particularly in New York City, there was a lot of coming together as a community, but there was a very dark xenophobic backlash. And so Madiha was physically and verbally assaulted in New York. And I was sort of, having a very challenging moment around my identity as an American, right? I was going to school with individuals that, had survived Rwandan genocide, had people killed in genocide from around the world, or Palestinians who were coming to New York to go to school, folks who had experienced very intense conflict all throughout the world, and then coming back to, some of the communities where either I grew up or I had connections to that had a way of narrowing after that event. And so that entire second year of grad school, we worked with a professor there who happened to be in nonprofit management, David Morass, who was a founding board member, and spent that time essentially doing kind of a landscape analysis of how were we teaching about the world and building the competencies to thrive in it. I grew up in the food flag festival fashion mode, right? I know you did too. We've talked about this, where we made a bouche de Noel, we celebrated Cinco de Mayo. It was isolated, siloed, and I'm still of the opinion, and I see sort of the damage that's done here, is that had this way of exoticizing the experience of things that are global or that happen outside your own community, rather than creating resonance and connection or even interest and additional curiosity. And so being kind of I think we're contemporaries. So we grew up in a time where what you knew about Africa, literally the continent, for example, was shaped by media images of young Black starving babies during famine with flies on their heads, or We Are the World, coming in to try and save. And I think just because of the exposure that I had, my dad lived and worked in Africa. Again, he was a teacher and college professor, and then K-12. We just, at that moment in time, it sort of felt like the world is changing in a lot, and we didn't even that was obviously more than 20 years ago, and we didn't even really know what was ahead, right? It's pre-iPhone, it's pre-Facebook, it's pre the way technology has accelerated all that change. And we sort of looked around and said, workforce is changing, like what it means to be ready for the workforce is changing. Our communities are changing. If I go back to the town I grew up in, New Jersey, it would be like unrecognizable in terms of how much more culturally and ethnically diverse it is now than it was when I was growing up. And that's true everywhere, here in Minnesota and small towns. And then we also just thought about, the challenges that we were going to confront as a country, as communities across the world, and how are we actually going to prepare young people to address them, to solve them. And so from that year of work, the framework for World Savvy came together. There are obviously lots of organizations that were doing really great work in this space. Particularly, I would say there wasn't really an absence of amazing curriculum, right? On topic and issue areas, right? But professional development at the time, if you remember, it was much more focused on sort of, come and learn about how to teach the Holocaust, or come and topically based, learn about the Middle East, learn about, and what we really wanted to look at was, how do you look at this through a competency-based lens, right? So you could actually build a pedagogical approach that was grounded in global competence, so that the diversity of your students could be leveraged as an asset in that room. And you're naturally creating relevant connections to life outside the classroom. And how would you almost help teachers unlearn a lot, because teacher education really didn't do that, right? I mean, that's so we started, that was 2001 and 2002. We went to San Francisco, Oakland, to start World Savvy's work. And the reason for that is, for those of you who may be in New York City or have worked in New York City, it is, it's a massive school district with its own kind of political entity. And we wanted to start the work in a similarly situated district, meaning the challenges that most urban public school districts face that there tend to be a lot of similarities, but at a smaller scale, and one that had a really supportive nonprofit community. And so the West Coast really provided that. And from there, from 2002 on, the model looks very different now in terms of how we've consolidated it. And I can share more about that in a bit. But at the time, we had a lot of a mix of, I want to say strategy, but I think it was probably more luck. We met some folks during a small school movement there there were comprehensive high schools breaking into smaller high schools. Almost out of the gate, got on a team for Youth Empowerment School that was an offshoot of Fremont High School in Oakland that was and began to work on that school design team, looking at things like community mapping and how would you get students deeply engaged in issues that they could see around them and make connections to other parts of the world. So that's sort of how we began. Madiha stayed on the team until 2006. She's actually back running the largest K-12 independent school in Dhaka. It's called, Scholastica. Sorry, I always do that. And actually right before the pandemic, started an elementary school there that is very much, it's called Aurora. It is sort of kind of the essence of World Savvy's approach. So, and she's on our board now. So so that's how we started. That's how we began. Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
You would think that after all of these years of pandemicness, I would.
I know. I was
unmute every day. You're muted. So speaking of the pandemic, and it seems to me that there's been a fundamental shift in the work that you've done as a result of the pandemic. And I'm kind of deviating from what I was going to ask you, but how has your model changed?
Yep.
And how are you working with schools now as before the pandemic? And are there any takeaways that you and your team have realized from the pandemic in terms of working with schools? And I mean, we could talk about that forever, but I'd just be curious of how things have shifted and what you're seeing.
Yeah. So great question. On a couple of levels, I think I'll get to the pandemic in a second, because I have sort of like a meta existential awareness that the pandemic brought in terms of how to think about the work. But I think the way the model has changed over the years is we were always really interested in looking at this through kind of a systems change lens, not sort of how do we add a curriculum or how would you build just one? We really have asked this question, what would it look like to support school and district leaders who want to rethink teaching and learning, right? Like just really rethink how it happens in ways that, lots of the forums that you've put together over the years are designed to do, right? To talk about how can we really do this differently. I think what the pandemic offered kind of at that meta level is a shift for a lot of educators, not just educators, I would say the school and district leaders, the superintendents that we work with and talk to, the school leaders, to kind of an if not now when, right? Like once you got through looking at HVAC and, putting out fires and all the things that like people had to absorb more of their time looking at than probably they ever imagined. I honestly think it wasn't just the pandemic. It was the pandemic in the context of followed by an insurrection, followed by tests to the strength of our democratic institutions, followed by an election in which, you were 6 times more likely to share misinformation online. Like where literally sort of I think it shook people in a way. The pandemic, I wouldn't even call it icing on that. I would call it sort of the living, breathing example of what you and I always talk about, Lucy, which is that like we are connected. Our challenges are connected. There are global cause and global consequence to these things, and no one's going to solve them in a vacuum, right? And so if we're not ready to figure out how to collaborate across borders of all kinds to get that done, and this was sort of a living, breathing example. So what we encountered for our school and district partners is honestly a lot of courage and imagination on the part of some leaders who said, we need to, like, we can't go back to normal because it wasn't working the way that it was. And so what would it look like to really try something new and center this. I think that's true. It's not true everywhere, but I think that was a big push that helped us reimagine what partnership looked like. In terms of tactically, how it ended up changing, you remember probably before we sort of had, headquartered Minneapolis, Bay Area, New York City, and had sort of worked in the areas radiated around that. Almost instantaneously, the work opened up to support schools and educators in many other states, and so did our staffing model. So Maria Hersey, who's our director of strategic partnerships, is in Florida, and we've got an employee in Texas and California, where we sort of said, let's tap into the best educators and creative thinkers and collaborators that we can find, and let's get much more creative about how we're meeting schools where they are and to figure out what they need. So now all of the things we did over the years, Lucy, you remember we had like the Media and Arts program. World Savvy has always functioned at these three levels: what student-centered and student-led engagement looks like in classrooms. So design thinking, project-based learning, creating those classrooms that leverage student identity, diverse identity in the service of learning. Then educator capacity. So thinking less about the curriculum and the resources, although we produce those, and more about the teaching practice. Is this embedded into how you show up in the classroom? And then the third, which is more recent, is for school leaders and district leaders. How do you think about institutionalizing this across a learning community, and who and how do you need to do that in a way that is globally competent, right? You don't slap it in your strategic plan and then walk in and tell everyone you did it, right? Like, how do you even plan for it? So now these comprehensive school and district partnerships really operate at those three levels. It's a combination of workshops and instructional coaching for all the teachers. And so here in Minneapolis, Ella Baker is a partner. It's a K-8 school that's a newly re-envisioned global studies and humanities school.
Wonderful.
We work with every teacher in the building to provide professional development and coaching all year long. And because I mentioned this in the beginning, where there are lots of organizations 20 years ago doing sort of producing the resources and curriculum, but there's a huge implementation gap, right? And every state is different, the mandates, the strategic plans in every district. So really that instructional coaching and partnership with educators to help them bring this to life in the classroom has been part of the secret sauce. And then we work with a school to think about integration with strategic planning. What does community engagement look like with parent communities? We're even working with PTAs now. We will this year for the first time be also working on training and engaging school boards. That's very new.
Awesome.
A lot of, I don't need to tell you, like the last several years, I'm almost like school board, there's some heat there, school board elections and school board meetings were during the pandemic, where a lot of kind of the ugliest mudslinging was going down, whether it was around mask mandates or anti-CRT or any one of a number of things. So we're starting that work too now. So we think of ourselves as sort of comprehensive partners and thought partners that integrate global competence into teaching, learning, and culture across a school or district, but we don't do that alone. So a lot of our partnerships, we partner with lots of other kinds of organizations, whether it's Explorer Media or EF or, just Solutions Journalism Network, where when we get to know a district and a school and we see, you really need virtual exchange. That would be really a great addition. That's not a deep area of expertise for World Savvy. So the network of partners we build, which is a lot of the work Maria does, helps to say, so that it helps to sort of ease for educators this like initiative fatigue that is so common when folks are coming in. So what our programs look like now is kind of a more consolidated way of bringing all of those all that expertise and that model into a school or district as a partner to help them think about how they operationalize change.
It sounds really customized, and personalized for the school district. And I think that's important. And I've also heard recently, it seems like there's a trend towards this too, maybe people taking a different flavor, but they're of this kind of whole school approach. Like, how can we be of service to you and help coach you through whatever change you want to do? So ASCD seems to be doing some work. I think ISTE is doing some district-wide work. I just had a conversation with somebody from Think Global Schools, and they have a design studio now where they're doing some work. So it's interesting to see that this emergence of of another part of the ecosystem of groups and people who can be of service to school districts when they may not have the internal capacity or they need an outside thought partner.
Yeah.
So here's my question related to that is how do you build trust with your districts that, how do you build that relationship so they're willing to come to you and work with you fully?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like I say this a lot. I did not coin this phrase, but I believe it that, change moves at the speed of trust. And so particularly when we're working with schools and communities where we're not a part of that community, we're working in Asheville, North Carolina. We just have our first, partner school there and are looking to grow that work. Honestly, it's spending the time to learn to build a relationship through the lens of what they want you to know and understand about their community. So when we worked in East Tennessee, we did that for a couple of years. We spent a year, going down, talking to people, talking to educators, talking to community orgs, talking to student groups, talking to school leaders to understand, school board members to understand what's happening here. Like from your perspective, what does school need to be and do for the population of students that are in the building? What are some of the assets you feel like you already have, right? That you'd like to strengthen and bring out even more. And then the other really important piece is like, honestly, to build trust, to have those individuals tell you who their stakeholders are, right? Like, so who are the people that need to be involved in thinking about iterating, teaching and learning and how we think about it. And so I think that's just a key piece. It's like a lot of active listening. The other is that, and you mentioned this, like it sounds customized, only about 60% of what World Savvy provides is, I would say, off the shelf, meaning, yes, the workshops, there's more elements of what we do. The rest of it is completely responsive. So it's amazing, if you're in a coaching relationship with an educator or you're working with a school leader, like what happens when you feel listened to, right? When you feel,
Totally.
And I think in education, certainly most of the educators that I know, like that isn't really a common refrain, right? Like most educators wouldn't be like, when I speak up about what I want to change in my school community, everyone listens. So I think that's a really big piece of it. And honestly, if you kind of look back, everything we do is based on our global competence matrix. And so we can put that in the chat or somewhere else for folks to access. And if you look through those competencies, I think what we probably talked about this, Lucy, is it's interesting. I think to be an organization that promotes and supports other institutions doing this, you have to model it yourself in the way that you approach building trust and building relationships and partnerships. So things like active listening and inclusive dialogue, they're just part of the hallmark of how we enter into discussion.
I find I love the kind of work. I think it's really satisfying to me personally to work with a school district and to develop that relationship and to have it and to see it grow and have an ongoing relationship as opposed to a drive, stop and, one stop PD. That just doesn't seem to fly anymore.
I also don't think, to that point, Lucy, you mentioned this, but the school leaders and superintendents who like trying to find the connective tissue between like tons of isolated programs is a monstrous task, right? And oftentimes it's already happening inside systems that are siloed, not integrated, not designed for interdisciplinary collaboration, those kinds of things. So yes, like I agree strongly.
Do you work with schools outside the US out of curiosity?
Yeah. So you read in the beginning sort of the country count of here. One of the pillars, we have a Vision 2035 to build a network of 10,000 schools across the US in these partnerships that are centering global competence. We're at about 1,200 schools now. And we're talking about 3 to 5 year partnerships that are intended to build their capacity, right? So that they can do this work in perpetuity and that, yes, they know how to build stronger partnerships, et cetera. We've been really focused on building that in the US, but one of the pillars of that Vision 2035 is global engagement. And so one of the reasons we framed it that way is we're trying to have enough organizational humility to know that, first of all, the education system in the US is so different, right? It's dramatically decentralized. It's like state by state. can be incredibly different, right? And so we partnered with a European-based consultant last year to do a landscape analysis of like what would global programming look like? We've done the global competence certificate program with Colombia that went to Uganda and Peru, and we did the AYLP, which is an exchange program for students that was in Bangladesh, also in Peru, Colombia. So we've done work with schools in other countries, but in terms of this kind of partnership, we have not, and it remains to be seen whether we will. And the reason is, I don't think you can do global competence work as a US based organization unless you're immersing yourself in global learning all the time, right? So that's part of what the global engagement pillar was about. Like, you know, Mallory and Maria on our team are going to Finland in October. You've been to
100. Yeah. I've been there. It's awesome.
Yeah. And so I think we learned about it from you. And so what we're trying to do is be sure that we're in learning communities. Ashoka does a lot of this work. They have, you know, a lot of education gatherings. They have something that they're working on that's a weaving ecosystem in education, so that we're learning about how other people are looking at this work and how it can inform what we do, so that we have sort of, we can authentically understand what global competence means through a non-US based lens. That said, as you know, like, you know, when you talk to Madiho, who's running schools in Bangladesh, there's a huge demand for these kind of learning models in other places too. So I think as we get as our US based school partnerships grow, inevitably we will be doing more structured partnership with schools abroad.
To me, it feels like there's not enough conversations between global education groups here and abroad. And so it's really hard to have a good picture of what they're doing. But the little that I've gleaned from, we've had a relationship with Global Education Network of Europe, which is a research entity that does reports on different countries that are on global citizenship. And I believe they're coming out with some sort of declaration of global citizenship or something in November that I'm really curious about. But they're working at the research level and with ministries of education and that sort of thing. And it seems like global citizenship education is just something that they've already done because of proximity, you know, between countries and that sort of thing. And so there might be some lessons learned from more engagement between, you know, organizations like yours or ours and those abroad. The other piece of it to me it has been that the funding is different. Like here, it's like we're scoping to find funding and for people to think that this is an important priority, especially these days. And over in Europe, it seems like the EU, you know, Erasmus and groups like that are funding, you know, projects for teachers and things like that. So there's
not right. Yeah.
It seems like there's a steadier stream of that. I could be wrong on that.
Well, the most recent partnership we worked on, we're working with an organization I met through Ashoka that was founded and based in South America. And, you know, in Mexico, for example, they're like, the way that it would work there is the government would say, this is a great program. Here's all the funding. Go out and find the schools that might like to do it. And that just, there's nothing even, that doesn't exist here, right? Like you know, so I think, no, I think you're absolutely right. The other thing that I think is interesting too is, even though it's Global Education Network, like I've been, you know, I know you and I have had this conversation where, I don't think, I think this is just education. Like, I think sometimes having global in front of global education does a disservice to like, this is the world we live in, and this should just be what education is. And I was thinking about this a lot because, you know, it's sort of like the focus on STEM for a really long time. Then you have an insurrection, and now civic education is right. Like oh God, clearly we don't.
Band-Aid, yes.
And so in that civic conversation, the civic education conversation, maybe you're noticing these too, the same sort of siloed thing where it's like, what we're talking about here is not separate from competencies for citizenship. Like you can't talk about civic education in a vacuum that's isolated to, you know, just the US. It's not, it's you know, it's completely useless in that way, right? Because the way it has to be applied in the world is, so I think you're right. I think the siloing it is a dangerous thing when what you're really trying to do is sort of redefine what is a quality education as it applies to what's necessary to thrive in the world.
And my hope is that emerging out of the pandemic, hopefully, that we're rethinking some of these things and like thinking about how we can kind of restart a little bit. How, back to the main premise that I wanted to talk about today, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but, in terms of making classrooms engaging, relevant, and inclusive, what are your views on that? What does that look like to you? What's the world savvy approach to doing that? And any kind of advice for teachers who are looking to kind of, work on that aspect of their teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the subject of our conversation. So we
Yeah.
should talk about that.
Yeah.
I think the first thing is, we have 4 educational principles, and the first is cultivating connection. So do you know your students, and are you building relationships? Like even what Don and I did in the beginning, before we started the conversation, he was like, started doing this with my students, and what you learn is incredible. Right. And so that cultivating connections pillar for World Savvy, we spend a year, the first year for partner schools, trying to help them understand, like, what do strong, high quality relationships, so that young people know themselves better and their own identity, that they understand others in their classroom and in their community, and that the diversity is leveraged as an asset, right? That we're learning from it and it's embedded into the learning process. And that the same is true between adult and student relationships as well. And then literally providing opportunities where you show students that who they are and what they have to say matter. So we do something called Changemaker Hubs, but essentially we have this knowledge to action, these K2A experiences, knowledge to action experiences. And it's one of the models we teach educators how to use in the classroom to have sort of student-driven dialogue, so that what they think and feel is reflected in how they're learning. So I'll give you an example. One of our partners in New York, in Westchester, we basically helped them first learn how to use this model internally, so that their high school students could lead a K2A experience, which is a modified design challenge for folks who know the D-School model, about how to generate a master schedule that would enable 21st century learning. So we showed them how to do this. Students then led it with other students. And then the ideas that were prototyped through that, the assistant superintendent came up after it and said, we just spent like $50,000 on a consultant to help us with scheduling. And like, this was almost more useful because you had end user, describing the people most proximate, most impacted by this, describing the experience of learning. And some of those changes were integrated into changes to the schedule. So it started there, but where it grew was that same model was then used and replicated when the census was being conducted to help young people understand, why is the census critical? Why is voter turnout so important? And those same high school students went out and ended up partnering with community agencies to try and increase turnout for both the census and then later the election. So it's sort of like a lot of, that's one example in East Tennessee when we did it. These are students who, there was so much flooding in that region. They were taking canoes to school. And so the design question there is, how might we as young people take action on environmental issues that impact our lives? And, students, 50% of the students were multilingual learners. They were in an area that is rapidly diversifying demographically, that didn't always feel like their experience or their perspectives were, they're kind of not at the table, but on it. And so they went through that process. That area of East Tennessee has no recycling. Tennessee River is one of the most polluted bodies of water in the country. So they were coming out with things like, well, what if you designed a filter that has to go on every boat that goes through here that picks up microbial plastic? Or what if I just design an app so that, people can sign up to collect people's recycling and drive it, an hour once a month, you're on shift, or what about using vertical farming or organic gardening? So it starts small in a classroom, just literally around like, what are the protocols and the way you generate discourse so that, you know your students, they understand that their identities and their perspectives are really important. And then you provide structured opportunity for them to learn the content through those kinds of things. So that's one example. One of the great teachers at Ella Baker here in Minneapolis, Anna Lane, is fantastic. And she essentially turned a persuasive writing unit into an opportunity for young people to analyze everything about their school and learning environment that they might want to change. And then spent the entire time helping them build these persuasive arguments, and then created the forum so they could share that with the community, with parents, and with school leadership. And so those, when I think about inclusive and relevant learning, it has to matter to the student. They have to see themselves reflected in it. We also do a lot of work in sort of culturally responsive teaching and learning. And then they have to know that what they think about what they're learning matters, that it's meaningful, that it can help drive the process forward.
I don't think, I have two young people in my house, as you know, or they're actually not in my house right now, but they're 19 and 23. And I don't think in their schooling, at least in high school, I don't think they were ever asked to give any input into what was going on. I guess if they got involved with certain clubs and that sort of thing, maybe there would have been some opportunities like that. But to have a comprehensive, thought out plan about how you can, reach everybody in your school and give them an opportunity to be part of the conversation is something that I think schools should be doing, particularly now, if they aren't already doing it.
Yeah, and your kids' experience is kind of the default experience. Like we shove school at students, right? And I think a lot of this too is, if you want to make something relevant and inclusive, this idea of sort of the separation of community and school, right? Like,
yeah,
we just travel out and do a service project and then we come back in, is also works against what you're describing, right? Because the entire rest of their lives are lived in wherever they're situated in community, where they're experiencing lots of things, right? And so I think that's the other thing that we help schools and districts think about, is like, what is authentic community collaboration and engagement, and how can you just embed that into what an experience looks like?
Okay. This is amazing. I mean, I think it's having a trusted partner coach kind of relationship, and World Savvy comes with lots of different resources to kind of bring to the table, so that makes it a little bit easier if, maybe a school doesn't necessarily. I think the other piece of this too is that schools have to dedicate, by engaging with you, it's a statement. We are change, we're working on change, and we're dedicating the time and the personnel to do it. And I think that it's important that that's a starting place, right?
Yeah.
So we are just a few minutes out, so I want to make sure people have time to ask questions. We're about 15 minutes out. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? If you want to put them in the chat, I can see them. I can put them on the board if anybody says anything. Here's a comment from Sue Ann, which I thought was interesting. Light bulb, what do those outside the U.S. think of global competence is? So that's something for us to think about. That's a fun comment there. Anybody else here? Here's another comment from someone from Minneapolis. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Liz. I think everybody should hear that. So maybe Liz, she's in Minneapolis.
Oh, well, if we haven't met, please reach out, Dana at World Savvy. I think, and Liz, if you're in Minneapolis, if you're teaching in MPS, it's been around, like Minneapolis Public Schools had a 2-week strike, and then the superintendent left, and not unlike a lot of urban districts where the average tenure for superintendents is under 3 years, right? So this is the kind of stuff that we see, Liz, thank you for the comment, where this helps institutions sustain change, right? If these principles are embedded in what it means to learn at an institution, you can actually weather change better. The teachers, the educators we worked with, that when the pandemic hit, back to your question, Lucy, were better prepared, right? To try and figure out how to flexibly and create student-driven learning experiences than educators who were like, well, if I, right? Like the center of the classroom. So yeah. And the school board thing, Cassandra, thank you for that comment. I have to be honest, after the last couple of years, it was like a bit scary because a lot of ugly business was happening in school board meetings across the country, right? Threats.
Almost happened here.
Adults behaving very badly. But I'm hopeful. There is, we are not a political organization. I can't stress this enough. But Lucy, you and I have talked offline about this. There were more books banned in 2021 than there were in the previous 20 years, the highest number in 20 years. there were 1,586 banned books at a time when you need to expand perspectives, right? And they're mostly about racial identity and LGBTQ identity. And that kind of thing, in addition to anti-CRT and anti-LGBTQ laws that are race, like really, there's more than 24 states and hundreds of bills that are trying to kind of narrow what you can talk about at a time when kids need more than ever to have an expanded worldview and perspective. And a lot of that is driven by how school boards, right, show up and think about. And so I think involving them in the dialogue becomes really critical. And they're often not educators.
So speaking of school boards, this is Pam Moran, who is the former superintendent in Albemarle County, Virginia. And this is something that you're lucky that you're working with school districts that are forward thinking, and there's some that are not. And I haven't seen too many that are forward thinking, but I haven't been out and about too much with schools. So in the last year or so. So I don't know, but what struck me about Pam's work when she was working in Albemarle was that she spent a lot of time educating her board. I remember her talking about how she took her board places. They did, had readings together. She looked at it as her mission to bring them along. Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I was always impressed with your approach, because you have to work with what you're given in an elected situation, and as a leader, you have to inspire people to come along with you. And Pam was very, very good at that, it seemed to me. So
yes, I will be honest, I'm worried about that too. I mean, we were just in Berlin at EF's Global Summit, and we're training a group of 35 superintendents, and a couple of them from Florida and Texas, came up after, and literally, like, some of the laws that went into effect on July 1st had mandatory reporting if a student came out to you. I mean, can you imagine, like, talk about authoritarian, like, sort of control over what teaching and learning looks like at a time also when we've got, what is it, 30% educator attrition leaving the profession. Yeah. So I do think that's happening in a lot of places. What I'm hoping, I'm always buoyed by this quote that I keep up in my office, Anand Giardatis, that says that some of what we're seeing in this might be more of sort of the death rattle. Like, we are a multi-ethnic democracy living in a world that in the last 20 years has changed at an exponentially greater pace than the 50 years prior. And we're not quite, like, the awareness of that we have to do things differently, that those who are the most resistant to change, that will die out when we sort of evidence that
we're going through kind of this ugly, messy, necessary examination of what it means to at least in the US to be a school and an educator and that sort of thing. It also feels like a lot of this stuff that's going on with banning books and that sort of thing is really fundamentally anti-American. Because we're all about, we're supposed to be about liberty and democracy and freedom of speech, and that's the complete opposite of it. And so I think, I don't know if I thought in high school about what it meant to be to be part of this country in general. And I think it's important that I don't know. I've had a great civic education the last 6 years myself. And
truly.
Yeah. And it's there's a lot to work with. And so I'm hopeful. So coming back to that, how do we make global education, global citizenship, whatever, global competence, whatever you want, whatever term you prefer, how do we make it important again? Or how do we raise the profile again? How do we help people understand? I'm not sure if every school leader out there knows what global competence is.
Sure not.
Yeah. So how do we create a campaign or something around this? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the way we started talking about it is like, and actually it was subtle, but we dropped like global competence from the main message. Like, this is a community that this resonates for this community, right? We're sort of like, everyone who's listening, I'm making the assumption, is sort of really engaged in global collaboration and learning, and that's why you're here. It's how we attract folks. What we're doing now, particularly at like the state level when we're speaking to groups of superintendents, is honestly, Lucy, trying to drop it from global education to just sort of, how do you reimagine education in the world? Like the global's implied, right? Like, so like, what's the world we're in? What's necessary for students, and the pillars we've been using to build that movement. And so you'll see on our website, instead of saying global competence now, we talk about equitable, inclusive, and future ready. What does that actually look like? And again, if you are alive and breathing, the pandemic demonstrated this more than anything, that like, yes, these issues are borderless. Yes, the solutions must be pursued in a collaborative, across border manner. And so we use data from the Future of Jobs report, right? I'm on a soapbox now about the fact that people still call these soft skills. They're like 90% of employers say these are the most important things, more important than technical skills, and 89% of them say they can't find them, right? And so we're talking to educators or school leaders through the lens of, listen, if you believe that the purpose of education is around developing young people for jobs, to be economically engaged and self-sustaining, what do they need, right? Critical thinking, analytical thinking, cross-cultural communication and collaboration skills, all those things. So that's one. The other is, thanks, Don. Yes, the Future World Book. And the Future Jobs Report comes out every October. And it's fascinating. Like, to any of you here working, whether you call it global citizenship, which is much more popular abroad because citizenship is so charged here. I think that's really why that word hasn't stuck in the US. You're going to crosswalk that and see this is what people are saying we need.
And we've been talking for, you met our friend Scott McLeod in Colorado, and I don't know if you know that he created along with Carl Fish this "Did You Know" video that was huge.
Oh yeah, because he came up because I quoted it in my keynote. Some of his, and he ran up and was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm the shift happens guy." I love Scott. He's brilliant.
I hung on every slide there of that, 15 years ago, whenever it came out, and it's all true. What they were saying in that slideshow years ago has come true. We've had and more, I guess. But I don't really know if the movement is, I think the change in schools has been really incremental.
Oh, very yeah.
And I like your approach to kind of taking the global out of it. And I guess I agree that I feel like it's the skills, those soft skills that we've been talking about since that time.
Yeah.
Are what we're talking about when we refer to global competence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you know offhand too? Here's another question for you. What's ever happened with OECD and their global competence model and the PISA? Are they still giving that test, or did they put that on?
Yeah, so
kind of piloted, wasn't it? And then they
piloted
on hold for the pandemic.
Yeah, the data came out in 2020. Totally fascinating too. We could probably put some links to this in the chart, if Maria, in this chat rather, Maria, if you have it. I think the intention is to continue, I believe, fusion skills. Bill, I really like that. Yes, I love that. We asked that question. Sorry to now I'm like squirrel.
I'm having fun with this toy that I can put in people's comments and put it up here.
Everybody in the audience, like these, unless it's a kitten or a fuzzy blanket, like soft does not evoke any sense of urgency around what this set of skills are, right? Like nobody's like, soft. That sounds important. So I love fusion skills, and we ask folks to brainstorm. Like some people say, thriving skills, essential skill, like however that's framed. I think some like a marketing rebrand around the soft skills, because most of what's in that ends up being what we're talking about. To the PISA question, they're developing a new focus area, and it's escaping me what it is, but I believe they will still continue to have that component part of the test. The data, for those in this call that didn't take a look at the data that came out from that test, was fascinating, and would really encourage people to dive in there.
Okay, I'll look for it and see if I can find the link. If anybody has a last minute question, it's time for us to wrap up, and I want to be really cognizant of people's time. So I'm going to go through my little spiel. and wrap things up. But if you have last minute questions, feel free to throw them in the chat wherever you are. So many thanks to Dana for being here and taking time. I know you're super, super busy, and it's always great to reconnect with you. I feel like we haven't seen each other in like years now, which is true. And so it's great to be here with you. So thank you. And everybody's going to give you a virtual applause.
Thank you so much. It was really like, I feel like I could talk to you, as you know, because we have.
Yes. Maybe we should do this every month. We could do
it.
it.
We're 4 hours straight about these things. So,
and these actionable innovations conversations are meant to be networking and connecting events for people out there. So come anytime, whether you're in the audience or not. If you want to be in the audience, people, or if you want to be on stage with us, we're happy to plan something with you or bring people up in the middle of a session I'm talking to the people in the audience. We're happy to have you as part of this. Our next one that's scheduled, and we have a couple more that are not scheduled yet, is with Heather Singh Master, who Dana, you probably know, has moved to Digital Promise from the Asia Society.
Oh, actually, that's great.
Yeah. It's kind of big news there. And I think in July, she moved. So she'll be working with like Lisa and Elise at Digital Promise and still doing kind of the same thing on career technical education and global competence and some other things. And so she's going to be, we were supposed to talk to her in June and we had to postpone. And she's going to be our guest next week. So we'll be talking more on this topic with her and getting her perspective. So if you want to attend, friends, the best place to register is on Hopin, because then it's a little bit more interactive than if you're watching on LinkedIn or on YouTube. So that's the link to it if you want to scan it or type it into your browser. I also will be sending the recording out to everybody who registered on Eventbrite or on Hopin. So, and it's also will be available immediately after this in YouTube probably. And if you want to be part of our conversations, if you want to be up here and I'll interview you or give us a presentation about your work, Pam and Ira, I'm looking at you. Send me an email and I will be happy to get you started on all that. And I think that's it. So that's the same thing. And there's our social media too. If anybody wants to follow us on social media, our conference, by the way, we didn't talk a ton about this, but our conference is coming up. Bill Rankin in the audience is my co-chair. World Savvy is our premier partner. We are accepting proposals through November 1st and then on a rolling basis. And I'm really excited. And so it's going to be in Hopin, the platform, like kind of similar to this. And that's taking place November 18th and 19th around the clock. So if you have an area of passion that you want to share with other people about anything related to global competence and innovation in education, we'd love to have you share your ideas and be part of the community for that global extravaganza. And I think that's all the news that's fit to print. Thanks, everyone. I'm so glad to have you here. And Dana, you're the best. I'm so glad to see you. And we'll see you next Friday, everybody.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks all.